They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes, when you've been burned enough times, you learn to appreciate the heat of watching everything your tormentor built go up in flames. The morning Blake Sterling called me into his office, I knew something was wrong. Not the usual wrong where he'd steal credit for my analysis or dismiss my warnings about critical flaws in our client strategies. This was different. He had that particular smile, the one that made junior analysts quit without notice and senior consultants suddenly remember they had dentist appointments. 20 minutes before the Phoenix manufacturing presentation, the most important pitch of the quarter, Blake decided it was time for my performance review. I sat across from him in the glass-walled conference room, watching him shuffle papers he'd clearly prepared days ago. The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the Mont Blanc pen he always twirled when he thought he was being clever. I'd been with Premier Strategy Group for 3 years, and in that time, I'd watched Blake systematically dismantle careers with that same theatrical precision. First it was Marcus Chen, a brilliant data scientist who made the mistake of correcting Blake's math during a board presentation. Then Sarah Mitchell, who had the audacity to receive praise from a client Blake considered his personal territory. Each destruction followed the same pattern, and now it was my turn. Blake leaned back in his leather chair, the one he'd requisitioned specially to make himself appear taller during meetings. His voice carried that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. "Nadia, we need to discuss your aggressive behavior in client meetings. Multiple stakeholders have expressed concerns about your confrontational approach." I kept my expression neutral, though my fingers pressed hard against my thigh under the table. Which stakeholders specifically? Because the thank you emails I've received from Phoenix, Meridian Tech, and Hartford Industries suggest otherwise. His smile widened, revealing those veneered teeth that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "The feedback has been verbal, Nadia. Not everything needs a paper trail." He slid a document across the table. Performance improvement plan was printed in bold letters across the top. "Effective immediately, you're being removed from the Phoenix project. Lucas will take over the presentation. All client communications must go through me first." I scanned the document, noting the retroactive dates and fabricated incidents. One claimed I'd been hostile during a meeting I hadn't even attended. Another described me interrupting clients when I'd been out with food poisoning that day. The thoroughness of his deception was almost impressive. "You're removing me from Phoenix 20 minutes before the presentation? The presentation based entirely on my analysis?" "Your analysis was preliminary. Lucas refined it, made it client-ready." Blake's fingers drummed against his desk, a nervous habit he thought made him look thoughtful. "Consider this an opportunity to improve your soft skills. You're brilliant with data, Nadia, but you're becoming a liability." The word echoed in the sterile conference room. Liability. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, of catching errors that would have cost clients millions, of building frameworks that Blake presented as his own innovations, and I was a liability. I thought about the Phoenix presentation, about the safety protocols I'd flagged that Blake had ordered me to minimize in the report. The ones that could cause catastrophic failure within 18 months if left unaddressed. I remembered the late night 3 weeks ago when Blake had called me into his office, insisting I remove what he called unnecessarily alarming projections from the analysis. I stood slowly, smoothing my black blazer. "You're making a mistake, Blake." "Is that a threat?" His voice sharpened, eager for me to give him additional ammunition. "No, it's data-driven analysis. You've just removed the only person who understands the fatal flaw in the Phoenix implementation strategy." I picked up the PIP, folding it precisely. "But please, proceed with your refined version." Walking back to my desk, I felt the eyes of my colleagues tracking my movement. Some sympathetic, most carefully neutral. Office politics had taught them to avoid association with anyone in Blake's crosshairs. I passed Lucas at his cubicle, already rehearsing my presentation notes. He had the decency to look uncomfortable, probably remembering how I'd spent the last 2 months teaching him everything he knew about predictive modeling. My computer access was already restricted. Emails blocked, shared drives locked. Classic Blake, thorough in his cruelty. But he'd made one critical error. He'd taught me to be thorough too. I opened my personal laptop, accessing the encrypted folder I'd named Black File, 3 years of documentation. Every stolen idea, every suppressed report, every safety concern he'd buried to maintain client relationships and his bonus structure. Screenshots, emails forwarded to my personal account, recorded conversations from states with one-party consent laws. I'd started collecting evidence after watching him destroy Sarah Chen, a brilliant strategist who'd made the mistake of outshining him in front of the CEO. Sarah now worked as a barista in Portland, too traumatized by the experience to return to consulting. The folder contained more than just evidence of Blake's professional misconduct. There were emails where he'd explicitly instructed team members to bill clients for hours not worked. Messages where he'd shared confidential client information with competitors in exchange for favors, and most damning of all, a pattern of safety concerns he'd systematically suppressed across multiple projects. Phoenix Manufacturing was just the latest in a long line of disasters waiting to happen. My phone buzzed. A text from Margot Hayes, head of HR, someone who'd watched Blake's pattern of destruction for even longer than I had. Coffee? Usual place, 1 hour. The usual place was a Starbucks 3 blocks from the office, far enough to avoid Blake's network of informants. Margot was already there when I arrived, her silver hair gleaming under the afternoon light, her expression unreadable behind designer glasses. "Let me guess," she said, sliding a latte across the table. "Performance improvement plan with retroactive documentation? You've seen this before. More times than I can count." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I have files on 7 analysts who've received similar treatment. 3 of them left the industry entirely. 1 attempted suicide." The weight of her words settled between us. "And you've done nothing?" Margot's laugh was bitter. "I've tried. But Blake brings in 40% of our revenue. The board sees numbers, not casualties." She studied me over her glasses. "Though something tells me you're not planning to go quietly. Blake is presenting Phoenix Manufacturing today. He's removed critical safety data from the analysis. When their production line fails, and it will fail, people will get hurt. Do you have proof?" I showed her my phone screen, the original analysis with the safety flags highlighted in red, compared to Lucas's sanitized version. Margot's expression darkened as she scrolled through the data, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "This is criminal negligence," she whispered. "If this fails the way your models predict, 17 to 23 casualties in the first incident alone, based on their current shift patterns, hundreds more in the cascade failures that follow." Margot was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. "Bennett Calder is their chief safety officer, former military, takes protocol seriously." She scrolled through LinkedIn. "He'll be at the Safety Innovation Summit tomorrow, downtown Marriott." "I don't have an invitation." "No," Margot smiled, "but Dr. Eleanor Reed does, and she owes me a favor. She's keynoting. I'll make the introduction." That evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by printed copies of everything in the black file. My cat, Schrödinger, weaved between the papers, occasionally batting at a particularly damning email. I'd named him that because until you opened the box of corporate secrets, you never knew if your career was alive or dead. Tonight, I was definitely opening the box. I called my sister in Seattle. "Remember when you told me to document everything when I started this job? The advice you ignored for the first 6 months?" She laughed, but there was concern in her voice. "What's happening? Nadia?" "I'm about to burn some very expensive bridges." "Good. That place has been killing you slowly for 3 years. Burn them all." The next morning, I called in sick, claiming a dental emergency. Damon Lewis, Blake's most devoted sycophant, tried to intercept me at the elevator. He had that eager puppy look that Blake cultivated in his favorites, right before he threw them under the nearest bus. "Blake wants to see you before you leave." Blake can want many things. I stepped into the elevator. "When I'm done with what I need to do, you might want to reconsider whose side you're on." Damon's face paled. Even the loyalists knew Blake's protection was temporary and conditional. The Safety Innovation Summit buzzed with the energy of 500 professionals pretending to network while actually job hunting. The Marriott's convention center was a maze of burgundy carpets and beige walls, punctuated by vendor booths promising revolutionary solutions to problems they'd probably created. I found Eleanor Reed holding court near the registration desk, her reputation preceding her like a force field. She was smaller than I'd expected, but her presence filled the space around her. "You must be Nadia. Margot said you had something important to discuss." Her handshake was firm, her gaze penetrating. She also said Blake Sterling is involved, which means this is either about buried data or destroyed careers. "Both. Phoenix Manufacturing is about to implement a strategy that will cause systematic failure. I have 18 months of simulations proving it." Blake removed that data from the client presentation. Eleanor's expression sharpened. "Show me." I pulled out my laptop, running through the key failure points. Eleanor's face grew increasingly grim as she absorbed the implications. "This is a ticking bomb. And Blake lit the fuse yesterday." Bennett Calder is by the coffee station. Former Army Corps of Engineers. Doesn't tolerate bureaucratic nonsense. If your data is solid, he'll listen. She paused, studying me. You know this will end your career at Premier. My career there ended the moment I refused to be complicit in manslaughter. Bennett Calder looked exactly like his LinkedIn photo. Square jaw, silver temples, the kind of posture that made you stand straighter by proximity. He was reading something on his phone, his expression increasingly troubled. Mr. Calder? I'm Nadia Vance from Premier Strategy Group. I need 5 minutes of your time regarding the Phoenix implementation. His eyes narrowed. Sterling's team presented yesterday. Everything looked optimal. That's because Blake Sterling removed critical data. I pulled out my laptop, showing him the original analysis. These failure points weren't theoretical. They're statistical inevitabilities based on your current infrastructure. Bennett studied the screen, his expression darkening with each slide. I walked him through the cascade failures, the heat buildup in the primary systems, the stress fractures that would develop in the support structures. His jaw clenched tighter with each revelation. This shows catastrophic failure within 18 months. 16 months if you maintain current production speeds. The mounting stress on the primary coolant system will cause a cascade failure. I pulled up the simulation, showing him the 3D model of exactly how his facility would fail. Blake knew this. He ordered me to remove it because it would delay implementation and affect his quarterly bonus. You're telling me Sterling knowingly submitted falsified safety data? I'm showing you the evidence. What you do with it is your decision. Bennett was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table in a pattern I recognized from my military friends, a habit from years of tactical planning. Then he pulled out his phone. Gregory? We need an emergency board meeting. Tonight. No, it can't wait. He looked at me. Can you send me everything? The original analysis? The communications? All of it? Already done. You realize this will end your career at Premier. I thought about the PIP sitting on my desk, about 3 years of diminishment and theft. My career there ended the day I started telling the truth. Bennett stood, gathering his materials. Miss Vance, you may have just saved lives. That matters more than any career. He paused. If you need a reference after this burns down, call me. That evening, I received 17 missed calls from Blake, each voicemail more frantic than the last. I didn't return them. Instead, I spent the night organizing the black file into a comprehensive report, complete with executive summary, evidence appendix, and a timeline of Blake's systematic suppression of safety concerns across 6 different clients. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find security already gossiping about the emergency meeting in conference room A. Blake had been summoned at dawn. I walked to my desk, noting how conversations stopped as I passed. My access was completely revoked now, but it didn't matter. The wheels were already in motion. At 9:15, Blake's assistant rushed past, her face pale. At 9:30, raised voices echoed from the executive floor. At 9:45, my phone rang. Miss Vance? This is Gregory Keller, CEO of Phoenix Manufacturing. We need you in conference room A immediately. The walk felt both endless and instant. Each step echoed in the hallway like a countdown. I pushed open the door to find Blake red-faced at one end of the table, Gregory Keller and his legal team at the other. Bennett Calder nodded slightly as I entered. The projection screen showed my original analysis, every buried safety concern highlighted in damning detail. Blake stood as I entered, his composure cracking like cheap veneer. You went behind my back. You violated company protocol. I prevented a catastrophe you were willing to enable for a commission check. You have no proof I ordered you to alter anything. I pulled out my phone, finding the recording from our planning session 3 weeks ago. Blake's voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. I don't care what your simulations say, Nadia. Remove the safety concerns or I'll find someone who will. This deal needs to close this quarter. I've got a beach house riding on this commission. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on something between purple and puce. I saw the exact moment he realized I'd been recording our conversations for months. Gregory Keller spoke first. Mr. Sterling, you submitted fraudulent analysis that could have cost lives and billions in lawsuits. We're terminating our contract immediately and pursuing legal action. This is entrapment, Blake sputtered. She recorded me without consent. Illinois is a 2-party consent state, I said calmly, but our planning session was in Missouri. 1-party consent. I always schedule our critical meetings there. You should read your own travel reports. Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You planned this? No, Blake, I documented this. You planned it when you decided my analysis was less important than your commission. The door opened again. Meredith Thorne, Premier's CEO, entered with Margot behind her. Meredith's expression could have frozen hell twice over. She'd built this company from nothing, and Blake had just threatened everything she'd worked for. Blake, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Margot will handle the documentation. She turned to me. Nadia, I apologize for the failure of leadership that allowed this situation to develop. We'd like to discuss a new position, Chief Risk Analysis Officer, reporting directly to me. Blake stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You orchestrated this. You've been planning this. No, Blake, I've been documenting. There's a difference. You created the evidence. I just preserved it. Security arrived to escort Blake out, but he turned at the door, his voice venomous. You'll regret this. I have connections you can't imagine. So do I, Margot said quietly. And mine include the editors at Industry Weekly, the ethics board at Wharton, and your wife's divorce attorney. I'd choose your next moves carefully. Blake's face went white. He hadn't known about the affair with his assistant, or that Margot had documented that too. After Blake left, Meredith sat down across from me. The risk analysis position comes with a 40% salary increase and full autonomy over safety protocols, non-negotiable standards that no one, including me, can override. I want it in writing, and I want a team. Done. Margot will draw up the contract. She paused at the door. Blake wasn't wrong about one thing. You are a liability to anyone who thinks they can bury the truth for profit. Gregory Keller hadn't left. He waited until the others filed out, then handed me his business card. Phoenix Manufacturing needs a new consulting firm, one that values truth over convenience. When you're settled in your new role, call me. We have 6 facilities that need real analysis, not fairy tales. 3 weeks later, I stood in my new office, the one that used to be Blake's before his spectacular fall from grace. The view stretched across downtown Chicago, the lake glittering in the distance. My team of 5 analysts, all refugees from Blake's previous purges, worked in the open space outside. We'd already prevented 2 potential disasters and saved Phoenix Manufacturing $8 million in preemptive corrections. Sarah Chen had returned from Portland, leading our predictive modeling division. Marcus Chen headed up data integrity. 3 other analysts Blake had driven out came back, drawn by the promise of a department where truth mattered more than politics. Blake had found work at a small consulting firm in Cleveland, according to Margot's sources. His LinkedIn profile now listed him as a strategic advisor, corporate speak for nobody trusts me with real responsibility. I'd heard through the grapevine that he'd tried to badmouth me at industry events, but whispers of the Phoenix incident preceded him everywhere. Someone had leaked the story to an industry blog, complete with carefully redacted but still damning documentation. I had no idea who might have done such a thing, though the writing style did bear a striking resemblance to mine. The blog post had gone viral in our industry circles. The Phoenix Files, how one analyst prevented a disaster and exposed a culture of deception, had been shared over 10,000 times. Blake's name was redacted, but anyone who knew the industry knew exactly who it was about. 3 other companies had already terminated their contracts with consultants who'd worked under Blake's model. My phone buzzed with a text from Bennett Calder, production line running flawlessly. Board wants to expand our contract. Dinner Thursday to discuss? I smiled, typing back a confirmation. Through my window, I could see the building where Blake had once made his kingdom. Now it was just another glass tower in a city full of them, and Blake Sterling was just another cautionary tale told at industry conferences. The black file still existed on my encrypted drive, but I'd added a new folder, Closed Cases. Blake's was the first entry, but I'd already started documenting other patterns. Other predators who thought their revenue streams made them untouchable. Meredith had given me carte blanche to investigate any concerns, and I intended to use it. My computer chimed with a new email. Another whistleblower, another buried report, another executive who thought they could trade safety for profit. I opened a new case file, naming it after the executive in question. The data never lied, and neither would I. People sometimes asked if I felt guilty about destroying Blake's career so thoroughly. The question always amused me. You don't feel guilty for excising a tumor, even if the tumor once wore expensive suits and drove a Tesla. You simply cut it out, ensure it can't metastasize, and move on to the next diagnosis. Blake had taught me many things during our 3 years working together. How to read between the lines of corporate speak, how to document everything in triplicate, how to play the long game when short-term losses seemed overwhelming. But the most valuable lesson was one he never intended to teach. Sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold or hot. It's served with mathematical precision, backed by irrefutable data, and delivered with a smile that says, "I learned from the best. Unfortunately for you, I learned to be better." The city lights began to twinkle as evening fell. Somewhere out there, Blake was probably still raging about the unfairness of it all, not understanding that fairness had nothing to do with it. This was about truth, consequences, and the beautiful symmetry of watching someone fall into the very trap they'd spent years setting for others. I closed my laptop, gathered my things, and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles for truth against profit. But tonight, I would sleep soundly, knowing that at least one predator had been removed from the ecosystem. The Data Witch, as Blake had called me in his more desperate moments, had claimed her first victory, and she was just getting started.